Other essential is a chopstick. No, that sounds stupid.
Very prone to fraying. He is very prone to fraying. What's wrong with me?
Hi crafty people, my name's Marie and today I'm sharing with you what is in my sewing essentials kit. I've broken all my essentials down into 10 categories, the 10 main categories of things that I think every sewist needs. If you're a beginning sewer, I'm going to be breaking it right down so that you can find out the very basics that you need to buy so that you're able to start your sewing journey. But if you're a little bit further along, I'm also going to be sharing in each of those categories the extras that I've accumulated in that area that I think are really beneficial to me at this point in my sewing journey as well. At the end of this video, I'm also going to be sharing with you 3 things that I don't have in my sewing kit that I want to purchase. So if you're curious what they are, don't forget to stick around to the end to find out some items that I'm hoping to add to my collection soon. If you are interested in purchasing any of the items that I share with you today, there'll be some links in the description box of any of the products that I am able to find and link for you. So with all of our introductions out of the way, let's get started with our 10 essential things that you need to start sewing.
My mum's sewing essentials.
So this here is my basket of most of my sewing essentials and I'll be going through this with you today, both so that you can see the items in it and also how I organize them. When I'm not sewing, I keep this basket on top of my unit over there so that it's all together and out of the way but easily accessible. So this here is what it looks like. I have on the top here a tray and when I'm sewing, I take this out and I keep it on my desk. And that way I have access to the majority of the sewing tools that I need when I'm sewing. So I'll be going through that tray with you today. Also though, in here I also have all my threads and bobbins and some paper. I'll explain that to you in some of the steps coming up. The first thing that you're going to need when you start sewing is, of course, a sewing machine. And this here is my beloved Janome sewing machine that my husband bought me for my birthday quite a few years back now. I learnt to sew on a Janome sewing machine that my mum had when I was growing up, and she still uses that exact same sewing machine now. And because I know it has lasted over 20 years, I knew it would be a good brand, and that's why I'm really glad to have a Janome sewing machine myself. I often do get people asking me on Instagram or in YouTube comments or just in real life what sewing machine I would recommend, and my opinion is a little bit biased considering it's the only one I've ever used is a Janome sewing machine, but I do recommend them. I found it to be a really reliable machine and I've never kind of come across something that I'm not able to do with it. I have been able to sew through vinyl, I sew through Velcro, I've sewn through really thin, really fine, delicate fabrics using this machine with no problems. And to be honest, don't tell anyone, but I've actually never gotten my machine serviced and it's still going strong, so it must be pretty good, I guess. Some of the things I like about this machine are that it does have quite a lot of stitches available, realistically more than I really ever use, but it has all the stitches I could ever need. It also has a needle threader, which I really appreciate because threading needles is tedious. And I like that it came with a button foot because that's probably the main attachment that I have when I'm swapping out my presser foot is to swap it out for a button foot. I find that very helpful so that I'm not having to manually make buttonholes. The other thing I really like about this machine is the ability to move the needle so that the stitch width is changed. And I like that because when I'm sewing, I like to line my fabric up against the edge of the presser foot and then I shift the needle to the position where I want it to be to adjust the seam allowance. So I find that to be a really useful feature as well. This machine has served me really well so far. I really enjoy using it. It's not the cheapest machine out there, and being on the more stingy side of things, that can be a bit of a stretch, but I do think it is worth investing in a sewing machine that is going to do everything you need it to do and is going to do it well. Especially if you are beginning, you don't want to use a machine that is going to make your life harder because that will be discouraging for you. So I do think it is worth investing in a sewing machine. If it is a bit of a stretch to buy a good quality sewing machine, then you can just buy a good quality one secondhand, and I would recommend that over buying a brand new, cheaper, not so well made one. So now that we've discussed our sewing machine, I'm going to go through some of the other essential things you're going to need to start sewing. So category number 2 are some measuring devices. If you're just starting sewing, the main measuring device you're going to need is a flexible tape measure like this. This one here has centimeters on one side and inches on the other, and I like having that depending on what pattern I'm using, although I personally prefer to use centimeters because I do live in Australia and that is what I'm more familiar with. So I recommend everyone who is sewing have a flexible tape measure. That is definitely an essential. And I also like to have a plain straight ruler as well so that I can draw straight lines. I have a 30 centimeter one, which would be about a foot if you're do inches and feet. And I also have a big meter ruler as well, which is not sewing specific, but it is sometimes helpful to have a long enough ruler that you can draw really long straight lines when needed. But if you're just starting out, I recommend that you at least have a flexible tape measure, maybe a ruler as well, but you definitely need at least one measuring device. Category number 3 are things to cut with. And for me personally, I like to have 3 different pairs of scissors in my tray. I do have paper scissors for when I'm cutting out patterns, and I have fabric scissors for cutting out fabric, but I also have my pinking shears, which I use to cut out any woven fabrics. If you're just starting out sewing, you might feel that pinking shears aren't entirely necessary. You can just get away with fabric scissors, definitely.
But the reason I like pinking shears is that they're really effective in preventing your fabric from fraying too much. So I'll show you a little example here. As you can see, I've cut this section here using my normal fabric scissors, and I have cut this one here using my pinking shears. And as you can tell, this side is fraying a lot less. It is still fraying just a little bit, but not too bad. And the reason I do think that pinking shears are worth it even as a beginner is you want to have your fabric to be as easy to use as possible. And I do think that using just regular fabric scissors to cut woven fabric makes it hard to work with because your fabric's falling apart as you're trying to sew, whereas if you've got pinking shears, it makes a nice clean line and you're not trying to quickly sew things together before it falls apart. So I do think it's worth having both pinking shears and fabric scissors even if you are a beginner.
I also do have a rotary blade with a mat and ruler that I use when I'm cutting long straight lines, but I don't use this very often. I have it set off in one of these boxes back here so that it is accessible when I need it, but I wouldn't actually consider this to be an essential. So at the very least, you just need at least one pair of scissors to use to start your sewing journey. The 4th thing on my list is having an iron and an ironing board, and obviously that doesn't fit in my essentials kit here, but it is something that is essential for your sewing projects. Unfortunately, I really don't like ironing, but you need to iron your sewing projects. When I get my fabric home, the first thing I'm going to do is to pre-wash it, and then after that, if it's a fabric that needs ironing, I will go ahead and do that before I cut out any of my pattern pieces to make the fabric really easy to work with. This is not any sort of fancy iron, and trust me, my ironing board is not fancy. It needs a bit of an upgrade. But having some sort of iron and ironing board system is definitely an essential. It helps you to get clean lines when you're making seams or hems, and it helps you to flatten out your seams when you're ready to sew a next step. And just generally makes your fabric look a lot nicer and be a lot nicer to work with. I also have with my iron a spray bottle. This does have the ability to have water in it so you can make steam, but I find it a lot better to just have a bottle where I can spray what I'm working on and iron it straight away. This holds a lot more and it's easier to spray it exactly where you want it to be, but using steam does help you to get a better finish on your ironing. I've seen before like a tabletop wool iron mat sort of thing, and I would love to have one of them. I think it would be a lot more convenient than pulling out my ironing board all the time, so that might be something I invest in the future. But at the very least, you'll want an iron and possibly a spray bottle or the ability to make steam so that your ironing is nice and crisp. Category number 5 is needles. You're going to need some needles for your sewing machine and also some hand sewing needles. So in my tray of essentials here, I have a little container of some hand sewing needles of various sizes and thicknesses depending on what I need it for. And I also have some different needles that I use for my sewing machine. I keep the spare needles for my sewing machine in here so that they're always easy to access and close at hand when I need to change out my needle. So in here I have a little screwdriver which I keep in here, which helps to undo the needle and tighten it up again. And then I also have little packets of the different needles that I most frequently use. So if you're just starting out, I recommend that you have universal needles. That is the main thing that you're going to need for most fabrics, but I also do recommend that you have a stretch or ballpoint needle as well. These are the 2 main types of needles that you're going to need on your sewing machine. I also do have a jeans needle pack and Microtech, which is for really thin, fine fabrics as well, and I find those to be the next 2 most useful needles for me and what I sew. But at the very least, you need universal needles and stretch needles for your sewing machine. So that was the needles category. And you're also going to need pins. So that is number 6 on our list. So I recommend that you have a whole bunch of straight pins. If you're just starting out sewing, you're going to need a bunch of pins and somewhere to store them. I do like this magnetic pin holder here because it keeps them all safe when I inevitably bump the pins over. I do also have one of these which I used to use to stick the pins inside this pin holder, and Oopsies, I'll find that later with my foot, I'm sure. You do have the ability to put it on your wrist, but I didn't find that very comfortable or handy really. I ended up just leaving this on the table, so I didn't really think that this was the most effective pin holder for me. I do like the magnetic one better. Pins are essential for attaching your fabric together, ready to sew, so that the fabric doesn't move as you're sewing it through your sewing machine. So you do need pins. The other thing that is similar to that are wonder clips. Wonder clips are just like tiny little pegs that you can use to pin your fabric together. I do find that pins are more essential than these wonder clips, so I usually keep these stored in these shelves in my extra sewing supplies. Wonder clips are useful, especially when sewing stretchy or thick fabrics, but if you're just starting out and you're just wanting the bare essentials, then just get some straight pins. The seventh thing that you're going to need are threads. So underneath my tray here that I usually have on my desk, I also have all of my threads stored in here. So I have this acrylic organizer here, which has all of my different reels of cotton on it, and this little one here that has my bobbins in it. I do have a lot of different colors in here from different projects that I've made. I've made a lot of bright colored things for my kids, hence all the very bright colored threads that I have. But if you're just starting out, then I do recommend you just get black and white. They are the essentials that you're mostly going to use. And then as you're making extra projects, you can buy the threads that match the fabric that you're using.
You're also going to want to have a whole bunch of empty bobbins. I got a pack of 100 that came with my sewing machine, which has been really handy because then you can have a lot of different colors already pre-threaded, so that when you're going to come back and use that color thread again, you've already got the cotton reel and you've got a bobbin to match it. So I do like having a whole bunch of spare bobbins because it means that when I'm using a new color cotton, I can just start a new bobbin, and I always have that accessible for when I want to use that color again.
Threads was our seventh category, and underneath my boxes of threads and my bobbins here is the eighth category, and that is pattern making supplies. So under here I have a whole bunch of my kids' paintings that they have done at kindy or at playgroup that are on these gigantic pieces of paper. They do have some of their paintings on their walls in their bedroom, but they really have made a lot more than is necessary for that, so I keep them and repurpose them when I am drafting my own patterns. If you've seen my video about cloning kids' clothes, you would have seen that that's what I do, and this is where their paintings go, awaiting their fate of being chopped up.
It doesn't need to be old pictures like this, but it is useful to have some sort of big paper. It could be butcher's paper or wrapping paper, but it's good to have some sort of paper so that you can make patterns on. And the other pattern making supply that is good to have is some sticky tape and glue.
I do find that I use these all the time when I'm sewing, because as I'm adjusting patterns, or even if I have a printed pattern, I need to tape it together. Or if I'm drafting my own pattern, it is useful to be able to put all my paper pieces together. So although it's not fabric related as such, I do always have glue and sticky tape with me because it is essential for me when I am using a pattern. I also always have some sort of writing implement in my tray here. So I always have a couple of pens and a pencil and some fabric markers and fabric pencils as well. If you're just starting out with your sewing, you probably just need at least one way to mark your fabric, whether that be a piece of tailor's chalk or a dressmaking pencil or a water erasable pen, whatever it is, you'll at least want one way to draw on your fabric. And the very last category of things that is here on my essentials tray, I've called the Pokey Things category. And that includes things like having safety pins available so that I can thread elastic through things, or even if I'm trying clothes on the kids that I'm making, I like to be able to safety pin like a hem up at the right length or sleeves up at the right length, because if I were to use a straight pin, they'd be pokey when I'm putting it on the kid, so I use safety pins for that purpose as well. So they are in my Pokey Things category. Also having a seam ripper so that you're able to undo mistakes which inevitably happen. That is an essential. And my other essential is a chopstick, which may seem random, but it's actually not. It serves a very, very useful purpose in that when you're trying to poke out corners of things or trying to turn loops out the other way, this is a very handy tool. It doesn't need to be a chopstick. You could use a paintbrush or a pencil or a knitting needle or whatever, but some sort of pokey thing to be able to poke corners out of things is an essential. So if you're a beginning sewer, I do think you need all of these things. You are going to need safety pins, you are definitely going to need a seam ripper, sorry to tell you, and you are going to need something pokey to poke corners out of things whether it be a chopstick or something similar. So that is a tour of the 10 categories of sewing essentials that I think are really important to have. If you think that I've missed anything, then let me know in a comment below what are some of your sewing essentials. There are also a few things that I would like to add to my collection which aren't entirely essential, but I'm looking forward to having a go at using them soon. One of them is a loop turner. I don't have one of them, obviously. I use safety pins and my chopstick, but I would like to use an actual proper loop turner and see if that's any easier. The second thing is a walking foot, which I've heard is really good for sewing slippery fabrics in order to help you to have a bit more control when you're sewing with those types of fabrics, so I'd like to try that. And the third thing is that I would like to get a twin needle. I think that they make items of clothing look really professional, and my friend Sarah was mentioning one the other day, and now I really want one. So they are 3 things that I would like to be adding to my collection pretty soon. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to press like and subscribe so that you can come back and watch as I really do use these items in my sewing. If you're looking to purchase any of the things that I've mentioned today, some of them will be linked below in the description box, and some of those links will be affiliate links, which means that it won't cost you any extra if you click on it and buy that item, but I will get a commission for you using the links that I've provided. Also, while you're down there in my description box, I've left a link to my Instagram, so if you would like to follow me on Instagram, I'd love to have you over there so that you can see some of what I'm working on during the week. Over the past week, I worked on a lovely tiered skirt for Elijah's yellow themed birthday party, and I shared the making of that on my Instagram. So if you missed it, you might like to head over to my Instagram and check my highlights for my tiered skirt tutorial over there. And if you make anything from any of the tutorials that I have shared, I always love to see those on Instagram as well. Thanks again for watching this video, and if you'd like to watch any more of my content, 2 of my other videos will pop up at the end of this video if you'd like to click on one of them to watch them next. So until next time, go get creative, and I'll see you later.